Om Shanti. Warm welcome to Interview with a Raj Yogi. Our topic in this session is the importance of introversion. And as usual, we'll start with a reflection. I invite you to ensure you're seated comfortably, and you can experiment with eyes open if you choose. Very often, as I go through the day, because the physical eyes have such a powerful pull on what I experience, I am looking outwards through the physical eyes, the world outside, the physical world. And my sense of self is deeply shaped through looking outwards. As if my center has moved from inside to the outer world. But when I sit here now and start to look inwards, that is, start to feel myself centering, aware of my own presence, feeling the integrity of my identity, that I am separate from the outer world and even separate from this body, feeling my own existence, my inner activity, my own thoughts and feelings, my own nature. All my powers of observation pulling inwards towards the point that is me. And that act grounds me. I feel centered, grounded, very aligned, feeling like I now have a place to act from rather than simply moving around, reacting to the outer world. Om Shanti.
Om Shanti. Welcome to Interview with Raj Yogi. As Judy mentioned, the topic for this evening is the importance of introversion. And perhaps maybe just to begin, introversion isn't, I would say, if I can recall, not a usual pedestrian word. And so you hear the word introvert, and perhaps again, that might not necessarily be what we are referring to. So while I tend to some sort of equipment issue right now, I'm going to ask Judy just to share a little bit about what introversion actually means.
Yeah, it's obviously it depends on one's experience with the word. And very often it's described or connected to one who is shy, perhaps a little bit socially distant or withdrawn, avoiding social interaction, and very withdrawn into the self. Whereas we actually think of introversion as a virtue, perhaps a little bit of a different experience behind the word, very connected to a topic that we were reminded of this morning. But really, when you look at the word and just technically what it means is going inside, looking inwards, and what are the stories or versions within the self. And the closest I can think of how we use that virtue is really paying attention to the self, given that I have a certain understanding of myself. So I'm looking inwards to check my sense of self and my connection to that spiritual understanding of myself. So it doesn't mean that I withdraw or avoid or I'm socially shy, but simply this act of paying attention.
In the context of Raj Yoga, it certainly might be obvious to some and maybe not necessary to everyone. What is the intent of paying attention inwardly?
I always enjoyed that, the sharing that Brahma Baba didn't use the word meditation much. He liked the word introversion and this idea of how I talk to myself, specifically around the question, who am I? But how I talk to myself is quite critical in terms of what qualities I'm able to emerge in myself and also just how I experience what's going on. That inner conversation is really critical. So when I'm trying to shift a paradigm shift to a different consciousness, I really have to pay attention to that inner conversation. So rather than the word meditation, just that sense, it's a very important tool in self transformation, is that inner dialogue.
When you're sharing, I was thinking about something that we often share in the Raja Yoga course. That isn't that there's things that are happening aren't happening to me. Actually, someone today was sharing about that today. She hasn't even taken the course, but it's how do I respond to all that's happening? And so, when you were sharing about introversion, how can that become very helpful then?
Hmm. So introversion assumes a certain formula of how things actually work. And many of us have reached a point where the formula that we're operating with is very much from the outside in. So, what's going on outside determines how I think and feel and decide and respond. So, we're very reactive. We're living from the outside in, which is a very extroverted model. Introversion turns that formula on its head, that things actually happen from the inside out. So when a situation's going on, it's not so much the situation, but how I process the situation that determines what I experience. So I really want to be aware of what's going on the inside. Again, our objective is peace and happiness. So if my formula is my peace, my happiness depends on what's going on outside, I will probably remain an extrovert. But if I have figured out that my peace and happiness depends on what's going on inside, then introversion will be very important to me.
So, what you share implies that there is actually a sense of empowerment versus the one who is a victim of things going on around them. Practically speaking, can you share a bit more on your own experience? How that can be empowering because some do find it's hard to or frightening to look inside. That, seeing something unreal or seeing I'm reacting now just makes me more upset about myself. So there
Yeah.
must be something that might be a little off, or even, again, learning of what introversion is.
Right. So connecting introversion to our concept of meditation, what we explore in Raj Yoga is a very full understanding of who I am and starting to think or have an inner dialogue that's based on who I am, really understanding who I am. I say one of the top things we all suffer from is a lack of understanding who we are. And we might have a very limited perspective on that based on our current way of operating. And it could be quite disheartening. I'm always reacting and I really don't want to go in there and see what's going on. But what if I had a very full story that's very uplifting? And the story of our sense of self, that I am a soul, I am intrinsically good, but then I start to forget myself and I lose connection to that intrinsic goodness. And that's where um, that other activity comes from. So having a very full story of myself actually becomes quite critical, because now that I understand I am intrinsically good, I'm going to do everything in my power to fortify or nourish that sense of self. And that's going to mean remembering. And so introversion is key in remembering who I am.
It, it's come up with a few students, just hearing about their own personal story as a soul, not temporary one, but
A temporary soul or a temporary
a
story?
temporary story.
Okay.
Not the
Mm,
temporary story, but
mm,
the eternal story as a
mm.
soul, your journey. And they share that, it doesn't feel like it's gone deep. There's still feelings of judgment for the self or disheartenment for reacting, trying to have context. Do you feel that it's increasingly having a deeper, meaningful experience of my original self that then allows me to have, because of feeling that goodness, that I am able to have the capacity to actually accept that I've gone through this journey?
Yeah, we have developed a propensity because of that formula of living from the outside in. We've developed a habit or propensity to look more at the surface and operate and be very sensitive to the surface. And one way I think of it, I know that in fitness, as an example, when you're trying to make someone aware of their subtle capacities or mechanics, if they've operated on the gross level for a while, they really can't feel anything. Even though they have those muscles, they really can't, and they can't send a message to, they can't feel anything. They don't know what you're talking about. And it really, and it's not that anything's that they're not capable. They've just spent a lot of time on the gross level. And so that's a very loud and overpowering noise, the gross level. It's very accessible. So it takes a while to shift, that habit of being sensitive to the surface or the gross. The extroversion is quite loud. And so it takes a little bit of patience or time before I start to feel something on a more subtle level. I'm feeling something, but I'm feeling what I've become habituated to feeling. So but the capacities are there. We are souls. It's it's not like I'm not feeling it, I must not be a soul. That's not it at all. It's just that we've gotten so used to thinking about ourselves as bodies and feeling that, and that propensity keeps interfering as I try to get. So it just takes a little bit of patience, and eventually, at one's own time, that numbness starts to wear off.
Would you say then that introversion is one of the most important qualities in this study then?
I think it's really high on the list, especially if we're using it interchangeably with the word meditation. Um, Being meditative, that is going inwards, reflecting on eternal truths, being very aware of what's going on inside, personal responsibility, all under the heading of introversion. It's absolutely critical. If you're not paying attention to yourself, and we're saying this is all about self transformation, I don't know how that's going to work. So I have to have the habit of looking inwards in order to transform the self.
Now, you use the word habit. So, does it take practice, and can one maybe even be pushing too hard, I suppose?
I definitely think one needs to be interested and know the importance. I know that's a topic, the importance of it. That's really important to know the importance so that I am motivated, intrinsically motivated. We try too hard at just about everything because that ego is constantly looking for a payoff. So the odds are pretty good that we're trying too hard, and that can get a little tricky when you're dealing with subtle things. You can overshoot the mark. So much of what we do is a lot of, we could say renunciation, but a lot of letting go, releasing in order to access that rich experience. So, yes, the odds are we'll probably try too hard and give ourselves a headache and all those good things. And eventually we'll start to figure it all out. But I need to have that interest always for I want to get to an authentic experience. I want to go inwards, really know who I am. Once I taste it, okay, now I want to honor that experience. So, introversion again will be helpful.
It's interesting because I've heard lots of different experiences that
Mm-hmm.
individuals, and they say go inwards,
Mm-hmm.
and there's somewhere like I don't even know what that even means.
Mm-hmm.
So, practically speaking, because that's actually really the intent of these sessions, practically speaking, and I know because you do teach fitness, there are certain cues.
Mm-hmm.
What are, basically thoughts? What kind of guidance am I giving my myself internally that
Mm-hmm.
what I'm doing, and I'm not. I know there was a very honest student who shared that she didn't realize that like rolling your eyeballs backwards. I'm serious that
Mm-hmm.
we have some really violent things that we do, which
Mm-hmm.
is not what the study is about.
I think a great place to start what we do in fitness when we're trying to encourage body awareness, just the act of body awareness, forget about changing or trying to do it right or anything like that, just to activate the act of becoming aware, is for them to just be aware of where their arm is in space or what they're feeling. So a lot of um, just observation. I think being an observer without trying to change, just learning to observe your own thoughts and feelings. And some of they need to write it down, but just learning to observe what am I thinking right now? And there's no judgment, there's no effort to change. It's just what, we have one, I know you're aware, one student who looks a lot at breath. And breath is that sort of bridge between spirituality and physicality. And just to be able to get souls to observe their breath, it's quite fascinating because the way the conversation starts usually is, where are you breathing? Where is the body breathing? And just because I don't know where it's coming from, I said, I'm breathing here. And it's like, no, no, really, look at what, just take a moment to look. If you need to put your hands, where are you? And many, eventually it's found that there's no movement going on where the lungs actually are. We're completely unaware. But the moment that I start to draw my attention, so as I'm sitting, what am I thinking? And this is called introversion. I'm creating these thoughts, but I can, if I asked you at the end of the day, what was every thought you created? You could maybe think of 3 or 4. We create thousands of thoughts in a day. Introversion, an introverted soul is quite aware of what they thought during the day because they have this capacity to develop the habit of looking at my thoughts. They know every thought I create determines how I feel, not the things outside. So they're very motivated, but just the art of observing inwards is so useful to develop. And it's funny, even on a gross level we're pretty out of touch, and we know we are because souls will only get in touch when they feel pain. But that pain took a long time, physical pain, a long time. There was many signals well before it became acute, but we were completely extroverted and disconnected. So it's really about reconnecting, and just learning to observe is huge.
I know next week we will actually discuss about introspection, so maybe we will tie it all together. But the intention actually for the next several weeks is actually to look at the different capacities of the soul
Mhm.
on a practical level. And to be honest with you, when I actually first, there was actually a class, a course called The Powers of the Soul when I first came into
Mhm.
this study. And it really was okay, so how am I supposed to use this? How am I supposed to use
Mhm.
that? And didn't really actually have much of a practical understanding of
Mhm.
how it all sort of works. And that's not the intent of this, is sort of tease everything out. But would you feel that as you continue on this journey, that these different capacities that we will cover will naturally come? Do you need to actually be quite succinct and perhaps maybe systematic in terms of things that you practice, or do they just passively just somehow emerge?
Yeah, when we look at, as the example you gave, the eight powers, they all are one thing, which is spiritual power, and then using that spiritual power in different applications so it appears in different ways with that one power. And I think that, the beauty of Raj Yoga, it really always tries to reinforce, which is the main thing we want to introvert and look at, always try to reinforce the seed or the foundation, which is spirituality. And that, to me, is when introversion becomes interesting. Because if we take the example of a tree, again, we've just developed the habit of being pulled into the expansion, the outer periphery of the tree, the expression, what I'm expressing, and we kind of miss the idea about what's driving it, what's the seed or the driver, the motivator. So Raj Yoga constantly takes us back to the seed, which we call soul consciousness. So when I'm looking inwards, and this will deal with introspection, one is to look inwards, introversion, and then introspection, and what am I looking for? So I'm constantly wanting to develop this habit so that I will be equipped to be able to explore the seed of what I'm doing, what's motivating me, what's the intention, what's the consciousness. That's super important, because that's really the purity of what we're doing, not just what we're doing, but the purity of it is what's important.
So, for one who's just starting to practice just looking inwards, and it might be a scary thing, is it, do they need to know a bit more about Raja Yoga to even just start to look at themselves? Because obviously we tend to have a propensity of judging ourselves.
Yeah, I think that the first lesson's very beautiful because it tries to cover, or anticipate a lot of traps. It tries to cover a lot of territory. It's telling me who I am, but to say I'm a soul also, ideally, creates a sense of self respect, which is very important. Because when I'm saying I'm introverting or looking inwards, it's with a lot of self regard, actually, self love. Not that there's something wrong, but there's something right in there that I want to nurture and foster. So when we have that kind of feeling towards ourselves, I think it's easier to look inside. But if we just think we're wrong all the time, which is what thinking body consciousness has created because of the type of karmas we perform, so we really don't have a great relationship with ourselves. So soul consciousness tries to heal that relationship from the very get go, so that it's a little bit easier to work with myself in the transformation and the introversion.
Now, I know that what I'm going to ask might sound like a little bit of a repetition of what I had asked a little bit earlier.
Hmm.
Just having this awareness of myself as a soul, so that there's, this, just regard for myself. And it's interesting again listening to different students and their experiences
Mm-hmm.
in terms of that piece of what that actually looks like, what that actually feels like. There seems to be a very big difference between just thinking I'm a soul versus have had an experience, a genuine experience of myself, so that there are real feelings of regard. And to be
Mm-hmm.
able to sense that, because otherwise I might just try to manipulate,
Mm-hmm.
you know, feelings of regard for myself.
Yeah, I think one of the big four qualities that is promoted in any transformation, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, but is critical, is the patience. We're coming back from quite a spiritual injury, actually, and it won't really flip overnight. I can recognize this is right, but then the practical application takes time, and there's so many habits that we're overcoming as we try to align with what is true. So I think that it's important to know that it's going to take time, and that all of these subtle dynamics will kind of start to sort themselves out. The main thing I want to do, which is part of introversion as well, is be honest. And that's that too. It's all very new to us. We're used to the words, but we have it's with a very different feeling that we're, but really, again, I like the idea that it's one of the virtue cards, I think, but to look at the self with gentle, loving eyes. You're saying, well, how can I do that without soul consciousness? And it just, as long as I kind of don't give up, it starts to happen. That's all I can say. It starts, if I am as honest as I can be with my study, then this starts to emerge. The feelings, how I manage myself, start to change over time.
It feels like as if they're just things can happen in layers, I suppose.
Mm.
And it's not like some sort of linear, systematic way, but as we continue with the different capacities that we souls have, that they just strengthen as you go along.
It's really, it's the most fascinating thing, and I think more than anything, what what is the opposition, of course, to introversion, or you could use the word self-care, is ego. And the reason I think it's so multi-layered is because ego keeps morphing as we move along, because it's constantly trying to shut this down. And so there's just, it's so humbling. And it's I say that with a very beautiful quality, but very, it's so humbling as we move along, and just more and more of our crazy ideas are are sort of exposed, and we can see how those ideas were creating obstacles in transformation, but they're so well hidden, which is again why introversion, introspection are so important, is being able to look inwards and see with clarity what is going on. It's quite fascinating. Even as I sit here talking to you now, I know there's still so much to discover, and so much deception and illusion inside. And I'm not terrified telling you that about my, it's not like, oh my gosh, I might as well just throw, I'm aware it's there, but I also have deep faith that I am a soul, that I am intrinsically good. I do, that we all do. As we say, the greatness of the human spirit, I have deep faith. And I think we need to go in with that faith. When we say in the Course, have the faith you are a soul, we're not just saying, have the faith that you're a point of light separate from the body, but the actual capacities and qualities of the soul is what we're talking about. That we are intrinsically good, that we are able to restore our original state. Have the faith in all of that, because that faith really supports being able to go and look inside in a gentle way, but a very useful and powerful way.
I feel like we need to go back
Okay.
to Raj Yoga Essentials, where it's
Mm.
practically what am I doing when I am actually
Mm.
considering myself to be a soul? What is that feeling?
Mm.
So that it actually, again, consistently, as I'm accessing that experience versus thinking, because it feels like we may not actually see what we're doing internally and not seeing change going on.
Yeah, I think again, it's everyone, of course, will be different, but as you know, if I can be as honest as possible and develop, it's why we use the chart, is it helps me to see very clearly what happened in there. What was I thinking? What was I doing? Self deception is huge. When we're body conscious, it's absolutely huge. So to kind of be able to break through that, and it's a patient process, but to be able to break through that is a huge part of the journey.
I know we have a couple of more minutes, but the question that actually I was going to ask is I know some of you may know of the different capacities, powers, so to speak, of, of I, the soul. And before we go and start listing them all, would you feel that introversion is always a part of all of these different capacities? And I don't mean it to be a technical question as much as a soul, a healthy soul operating. If I'm really healthy, am I always in that, that internal state?
As I experience introversion as I'm going through the day, it always brings, whenever I look, if I feel I'm being pulled outwards, that I'm starting to be defined by the outer world, or by what other people think, or any of this, introversion always goes hand in hand for me with an experience of centering or integrity. So I'm reconnecting with myself as a soul, but that also means with the capacities and powers of the soul. So it's this connecting piece. So we can talk about the powers of the soul. It's amazing how much we try to do spiritually. It's part of that self deception without being connected to the self. And so, whereas everything's supposed to come from being connected to the self. So, I'm going to be loving not just by being loving, I'm going to be loving by being soul conscious. Or I'm going to be patient, not just by being patient, but I'm going to be patient by being we do everything through soul consciousness. So, that sense of integrity that always comes with introversion. Um, I know that that's where the capacity, the healthy sense of those capacities or those powers emerging is coming from. So it's like connecting or plugging in, reconnecting to the self centering, and then naturally those will come out.
And back to the actually experiencing it,
Hmm.
such an underlying
Yeah, no, you
key
can't
part.
get around it. It's really the main thing is to experience myself to be a soul. But if I'm extroverted, then I don't know how that will happen.
Well, I think that's a part of it is that you might be thinking we're actually having an experience, but it might just be still conceptual, just a point of light,
Hmm.
picture a point of light, but I'm not really accessing something meaningful. Hmm.
Hmm. Yeah, meditation. It's very connected, and so we're using the word introversion. That reflecting on eternal truths. It's very connected to thoughts. The act of meditating is connected to thoughts, which is why I think the word introversion is so much more powerful. But that idea, we say meditate, and I start to think about things, whereas what we actually want to do is experience things. I want to connect. And so introversion, I find it a fascinating word in English because version um, is verse or song, something to be experienced. And so I want to go inwards. And yes, I use the thought, I am a soul, as an entry point, but it's not the end of the journey. I am a soul. I want to then feel it. And there's a whole reframing, there's a whole significance to saying, I am a soul. it's a complete eye and mind completely changed. There's a detachment. There's qualities that emerge. I mean, there's just a whole massive shift that goes on, not just by thinking it, but by feeling. I am a soul comes very naturally. So we're lucky because in this study, we're always told about the signs and signals that we are actually experiencing it. So I don't say, oh no, I had the thought. Yes, but were those signs and signals there? So for example, one of those, when one is soul conscious, their physical senses become very cool. So this is a very helpful checking point. I can try and fake my senses becoming cool, but it's obviously not the same, and it's not consistent, and it's very helpful. It tells us that this is a very rich experience. It's far more than just a thought. I am a soul.
I'm going to squeeze in one last question that has come up. um, can one trust, just hearing that when you heard that, it's not to be a mantra, but like as if they can trust the feeling that comes and just sit with it. And I was just thinking about the other day because we were talking about pain. There are probably lots of signals that have accumulated through time for physical pain, and then now all of a sudden you're facing, whatever it is, but it has accumulated through time. So it's as if, so many of, I guess, gross things that we kind of get caught up sort of supersede, these subtle, subtle signs and signals. And I was thinking about that in terms of the experience of being a soul. If it's subtle, and that might be manipulating, not trying to manipulate, but trying to contrive an experience, think of an experience, and might even supersede, what that really feels like. And again, I don't mean that to be a technical thing, but for us just trying to get a sense of what I'm doing, and if what I'm doing is meaningful and real, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there's a few different traps that we've talked about. One is that we're not coming into this with a blank slate. So we have some preconceived ideas of what soul consciousness is going to be about, and we have huge expectations of what's supposed to happen, and those can really get in the way. What I do like is that three things go together in a genuine experience of soul consciousness, and one is the experience of myself as a spiritual being, and what naturally goes with that is what we call our home state of silence and our sense of belonging to the Supreme Soul. Those three things kind of go together. And those got very separated. So yes, I thought about God, 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 but I didn't have to think of myself as a soul. I kind of stayed this kind of worshiping being that, so it all got horribly, horribly disconnected. And so it's very nice how they're kind of tied back together in Raj Yoga. So I have a very wholesome and I think truthful experience of being a soul.
Well, thank you, Judy. It feels like it is a combination of a sense of understanding and to be able to experience.
Mhm.
And so we're always monitoring the chat box, but if you have questions that come up, please email us. I believe we will have to close the session now with reflection. Thank you for some thought provoking things for us to think about.
One of the beautiful symbols that we use for introversion is the example of the tortoise withdrawing into its shell. And it's such a symbol of protection, of care. And so when I draw inwards, it's actually the feeling of going into a sanctuary inside. It's not so much that I will see something frightening, but that I'm creating a space that nurtures me, that nourishes me, where I can practice self care on a very deep level. A huge part of introversion is establishing that inner space of sanctuary where I'm restored and I can study in the most powerful way. Over and over, I'll be pulled to come into that space because I have such a beautiful experience of that sanctuary, withdrawing into my own inner space of self understanding, self care, self transformation, my inner sanctuary. Om Shanti.
Thank you, Judy. Thank you for those for joining us this evening. I'm going to pass it back to Judy. Let us know about upcoming sessions.
Mhm. So we continue to have our drop-in meditations Tuesdays and Thursdays, 45 minutes, 6:45 to 7:30, and Sundays a full hour, 6:30 to 7:30. And these are, to me, I know when I started the study, I really appreciated these times of introversion. You don't have to use the word meditation. It doesn't even have to be long when we're beginning. We're just trying to establish that inner space. So use those timings as you wish. They're also archived. And then we also have Inner Fitness on Saturdays where we take a theme that's inspired by some metaphor in the physical realm. And that's 2 to 3 on Saturdays on our Zoom platform. So the information's on our website. This Saturday, we also have a workshop session, 12 to 1:30, and this is called the God Experience. And this, I believe, will also be on the Zoom platform. So the information again is on our website, and you can register through Eventbrite, so you get the information. So feel free to email us if you ever have any questions about courses or just questions about these interviews that you'd like to have explored. We certainly welcome your feedback. Thank you so much. Om Shanti.